So our presentation is about accelerating automation and scale, and primarily through aggregation. And you'll hear this word aggregation being said quite a few times. And if you're wondering, I guess the Q&A will solve that part of it. So what's the possibility with aggregation and an API-based ecosystem? And that's probably what the next few slides will show you, what an API-based ecosystem can provide to technologies built on top of the known buying platforms. So a little bit about who we are. If you've not heard about CtrlShift, CtrlShift is a technology-led global audience solutions company. As other people say, they're incidentally US-based. We're incidentally Singapore-based. The Hub is one of our proprietary platforms for media planning and buying, media buying, provided a self-service platform. The Studio is a managed services with a trading team option. And then, of course, AMP, if you've heard in the market already, is a very successful now Malaysia-based private marketplace that's going to be opening up in other Southeast Asia markets also. But there is an interesting piece to this, which is the lab. So CtrlShift also has a unit called the lab, which is housed with our data scientists. But the interesting part of this is it's not just data scientists. It's engineers, data scientists, product enthusiasts. Everybody from our founder down to our salesperson is involved in the lab, essentially because we drive business outcomes, and we drive business outcomes primarily based on the amount of data we have access to, the amount of information we have access to in terms of buying across various platforms that we do today. Some of the projects that you listed there are sort of the interesting projects we are working on. There are quite a few others, of course. Decision support modules for the Hub. It's extremely important where we are today. There's a tremendous amount of operational and transactional information, other than the cookie data, the device data, et cetera, that you hear about. And that information has to provide a decision support ecosystem for the people who are actually doing the buying. Then you have autonomous campaign management. This is probably what you'll see in the next few slides, a lot more conversation about what autonomous campaign management will look like, possibly very soon and in the future. And of course, some interesting projects like analytics in the box. I think we spend a lot of money in future planning and spending without actually looking back as to what's our diagnostics today for a marketer. What's their health check today for what they have done in the past? So something like that is solved through analytics in a box. So there's a fair amount of power at our fingertips today, but it seems like the marketers still are fairly frustrated. And there's a lot of reasons for that. You heard a ton of platforms talk through yesterday and today, but the key questions to ask are, how can we scale on execution? How do we scale on testing these multitudes of campaigns across multiple platforms? And then, of course, if you're optimizing, how do you scale on optimization? So our key proposition in terms of what we have built and what we are working on is actually to look at some of these questions and trying to answer these questions that get closer to the marketer's idea of actually targeting the right person at the right place at the right time. So this is a good example of the state of affairs we are in today. This is actually a job ad for a media trader from a US-based organization. Take a look at it. It says, multiple interfaces in a self-service capacity to discover audiences, maintaining and optimizing frequently, interacting with multiple tech support teams. I'm not sure about you, but I'm sure your head my head's already spinning reading through all of that. That's what a trader goes through every day today in spending the millions and billions of dollars that are coming through. In fact, we heard somebody say, Jeff say, trillions of dollars coming through. So how would you do this? How would you be able to scale with this kind of an operation? You probably have to have an army of people doing just this aspect of it, or, of course, fairly burnt-out traders who leave after a year and a half of working on this kind of information. So this is probably where there's an absolute necessity for an aggregation layer. I know we have a fair amount of aggregation in ad tech, and I think I go back to, again, one of the points that Jeff was raising. What is your value to ad tech, and what are you providing to ad tech so that you can say, hey, my software helps. My software helps automation, helps workflow. You do not have to log into probably multiple platforms to do the job that you actually do. So there's a case for an aggregation layer. There's a case for defragmenting what we see is a fantastically fragmented ecosystem. All good, by the way, because obviously it's adding to innovation. And each of these platforms are adding tremendously to our ecosystem with their strategies, their algorithms, and their method of actually finding the audience. That's the case that we are making through the platform. So imagine having an aggregation layer. So what does it do at the micro level? So at the micro level, I think what we're thinking of is having campaign data, having the multitudes of attributes that come back from the various buying systems that you're operating on. We've listed DSP 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but that's not the end of it. We're talking about an automated ecosystem, not purely what we say programmatic. You're talking about automated across the board and looking at all the data elements that are coming back from such an automated ecosystem that you then overlay with, let's say, change logs. Change logs of what activity you're doing, how you're optimizing, to actually get to maybe you want to predict the impressions. Maybe you want to predict something like a derived metric, like a CTR. Maybe you want to predict some other performance information. And that prediction itself could be prediction for tomorrow, prediction for a week after. But an aggregation layer that actually supports this kind of information, of course, again, requires strong APIs from what we believe is an open ecosystem. But is that enough? Probably not. And it's not because what we think is there should be a bidirectional API, not just pulling information and reports. I think that we have solved over the past few years. You can certainly pull the reports in. But what we're talking about is fully bidirectional APIs back into the platforms and into the ecosystems. So if you're able to pull the information in, if you're able to make these calculations, if you're able to build what you want to build, you need to push back the instructions into the buying platforms. And you should be able to do it at scale. So the question here, of course, is you'd be scaling across multiple buying platforms across the world, and it doesn't matter actually where you're situated or where your offices are, so to speak. So you remember the picture we started off with. We talked about an aggregation layer that sits on top of these buying systems. Now let's add an intelligence layer on top of it. So that's the key part of it. The aggregation brings all the APIs together. The data comes back. You've got bidirectional information flowing from the platform into the ecosystem. And then you build your intelligence on top of it. That's essentially what the lab does in our company. What we're looking at is how do we focus on providing this kind of information, this kind of layering on top of the buying ecosystem. So here's what's very interesting. We've been working with the hub as a primary platform. It is that aggregation layer. It is that layer that defragments what we see as a very fragmented ecosystem in terms of buying. And on top of that layer, our data science teams have been building what we call the intelligence layer. So we've got two problems we solve. One, we can clone campaigns really fast because we've actually integrated with these systems in a bidirectional way. Two, we can actually test based on the optimization models that we have built. So the two objectives together actually get you to test your campaigns far in advance than you can actually spend large sums of budgets. It also gets you to realize that there is a possibility, which we already have explored, of an autonomous campaign management ecosystem that is able to pursue your campaigns across the buying ecosystems to the goals, to the briefs, et cetera, that you have. So how does that help? I think what we are really looking at, and I know you probably have noticed in the presentation till now, I haven't used the phrase artificial intelligence. And there's a reason for that, because I think we strongly believe we're still at a very preliminary phase of what we are trying to explore. This is the industry in general. So we tend not to use AI too much, but the goal here is if you have an autonomous campaign management ecosystem, which is very possible and already built to a certain extent with us, you actually could be pushing 20, 25% of the money already into these kinds of ecosystems with low risk. That doesn't mean the human traders are not needed. That doesn't mean that human optimization will not be needed. And that's where the 80% come. But that 80% of money that is being done with human optimization is fully assisted by learning modules. It's fully assisted by a learning platform that's actually teaching the trader more about the buying ecosystem than where they are today. So fully optimized, autonomously deployed media dollars. I think that is the reality already. And you'll see that being pursued aggressively across the board. I think there'll probably be other companies also doing the same. So what then happens, and how does it benefit the marketer? One of the key challenges we see with all the marketers, and I've been in a lucky position that although I'm more on the technology side, I'm put in front of clients quite a lot to explain in plain English what the alphabet soup looks like. But I think the key benefit here is that the knowledge worker who actually fully understands the ad tech ecosystem, knows how to play with it, knows how to instrument it, knows how to calibrate it, actually now will be closer to the marketer, to the client, in explaining what these strategies are, in explaining how to spend your dollar, in assisting them in the planning part of it, rather than spending long nights and days, and you should check with your traders, and they'll tell you this, in setting up campaigns across 3, 4, 6, 7, 9 platforms. We've heard somebody on the first day say that they use 16 platforms to solve their MarTech, AdTech problems. That's mind-boggling. I'm not even sure what they do with like 16 platforms. But imagine that's kind of a scale with trillions of dollars flowing through. How would you achieve this without actually a knowledge worker spending more time on strategies than the tactical grunt work that you would actually see today? So I guess the key question we have, and we've been raising this quite a bit as we're building this platform, is how open is our open ecosystem? I know we sort of talk about the walled gardens and how we are unable to push through, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's very important for the ad tech ecosystem that's available outside of those gardens to look at how open they are. Are they built with APIs? Are they allowing other ad tech companies to innovate on top of them? Are these layers possible, these aggregation layers possible? Because obviously, I think all of us cannot end up solving all the problems. And that goes to the theme that I heard in the panel before, that we have to be working together. But part of it is to actually look at your own platforms and see how open are you for us to integrate. So what is the hub? I think ultimately what the hub is your 9 a.m. platform. And what does a 9 a.m. platform mean? There isn't a marketer today, there isn't a brand today, and there isn't a media person in a marketing team in a brand today who goes into the office thinking, let me log into a platform to see what's happening on the media side. They go to email, a PowerPoint presentation that was sent on a Friday night, possibly a dashboard link that shows them how the reporting is looking. Probably a week old, maybe 3 days old. But I think we need to change that. We need to have the marketers come closer to the ad tech, probably solve it with this kind of an aggregation layer that when you log in doesn't say DSP, doesn't say SSP, RTB, et cetera, but gives them exactly the information they're looking for and shows them where the dollar is being spent, how is this fully transparent, and certainly, of course, how is it getting optimized? And all of that is quite possible in plain English in a platform like the Hub. Thank you. That's basically what it was.
So we'll just do a couple of quick questions. Thank you very much for that presentation.
Oh, thanks.
I'm just curious. You want to put it there? Okay. I'm just curious about this open ecosystem, right? You talk about how open the open ecosystem is. What do you mean by that? Is it when you talk about that? Are you talking about like API access, all the rest of it? What? Just elaborate a little bit more on that.
Sure. So I think what we found very interesting is that all the ad tech ecosystem we have today, the DSPs, the buying platforms, et cetera, most of them are actually built by engineers who do build it based on APIs. There are interactions that happen between their user interface and their main engine. And I think their uniqueness is fully appreciated. We fully understand that they have their strategies, and that's where they're spending most of the money and doing their optimization algorithms. But there seems to be a fair amount of reluctance when we ask for APIs straight into their engines. And it is not to say that we won't use that engine. It's actually to say that we'll scale that engine even more, because we'll actually get the dollars that they're looking for to be pushed into that engine. So that reluctance is what we're talking about when we say how open is the open ecosystem, really.
So you basically want to get, the layer wants to access those DSPs.
Correct.
And when you talk to your clients, I mean, how much of a strain and stress is having so many platforms? And we talked about fragmentation, and obviously there is a lot of it, and you put up social there, but also you have your walled gardens. How much stress and pressure and obviously wastage is happening on the marketer side right now?
That's a fair amount of stress. You walk into any marketer and you ask them, how do you evaluate your products? There isn't actually a straight answer as to how they do that. And the answer is because they don't know how many platforms exist. They don't know how to even pick a particular platform. And I think the most important part, they cannot differentiate between one from the other. And the only way to differentiate is actually if you're able to optimize, test, and figure out which ones are performing better for you, if it's performance, right? But no, they obviously are struggling trying to understand this ecosystem.
And the walled gardens themselves, how big of a problem? Because obviously there's a case of reach and frequency capping, and how much money do I spend on these platforms?
Sure.
So this will continue to be a problem, right?
Absolutely.
We've got AT&T buying, acquiring companies. You've Comcast acquiring. So we feel that the walled gardens will just increase. This is you talked the Alibaba ecosystem, BAT. How do we solve this problem? Like this is that meta layer is very interesting, but how do you solve that specific problem going forward? How as an industry do we solve that problem?
So I think the two ways of looking at it. One, of course, is obviously before more walled gardens form, we have all these initiatives about common ID. We have these initiatives about actually integrating with these ecosystems being done. Obviously, at a state where you've got Verizon buying Oath, AT&T buying AppNexus, and so on and so forth, you'll get to a point where you've got 10 big telcos, or whoever they are, plus Google and Facebook, ruling the ecosystem. And then you may not actually end up having these kinds of sessions of openness and talking about how we can do better with the dollar. So one possibility is to actually fast forward yourself into this ecosystem, which is outside of the Google and Facebook ecosystem right now.
So do you have a strategy for Facebook, a strategy for Google, a strategy for Amazon, and then there's just the rest of us?
Yes, unfortunately, that's where it's going. But I think there are possibilities if you build the aggregation layer. Interestingly enough, actually, Facebook and Google have always been API first. You can plug into the Google ecosystem in any which way and fashion. And you can do all your stuff there in terms of your operations and so on and so forth with API-based ecosystems. But I think you can build the aggregation layer to the point where if you have enough information, yes, you may not be able to frequency cap because you can't jump across these walls, but you can certainly be far more efficient with your media dollar in terms of how you're optimizing on which particular platform at a given particular time.
And you talked about there about automation and touched a little bit on sort of machine learning, AI. How much of basic functions do you think that will sort of replace, and how much more sort of where do you see the opportunity then for the future trader then?
Sure. I think as a software platform, any ad tech company, a DSP or any other buying platform, obviously has a roadmap. It has to constantly add more features, attributes, et cetera, to actually get value out of the platforms that they're building. But I think the flip side is that I don't think the traders end up using all those attributes, right? So there is a core set of attributes that the traders use, and then of course anything that is additional that shows a bit of value, they'll actually get to use it. So there's a very good case to say that you could actually mimic a fair amount of this information with the core set of attributes and scale across these platforms. That itself will bring the effectiveness, efficiency, speed, and scale that you're looking for when billions of dollars walk in. They're already walking into this ecosystem.
Excellent. I think time's up. So thanks very much for the presentation. Round of applause, please. And CtrlShift are available all day. You can talk to us. Thank you.